Hey there, all you ghouls and goblins. Radio 85.9 proudly presents Horror Zoid with your hosts, Stevie Scares and Natalie Nightmare. Today's episode is brought to you by Black Phillip Butter Sauce. Black Phillip Butter Sauce makes every dish delicious. Welcome to another episode of Horror Zoid, everybody. I'm Stevie Scares.
And I'm Natalie Nightmare.
Not gonna forget the intro this week.
Thank you.
Definitely can't forget again. But yes, welcome back. Good to be here. Good to have another episode for you guys. And today our topic is movies about witches. So think about your favorite spellcasters and spellbinders throughout TV and film. And we're probably going to be talking about them today. There's a lot to cover. I know Natalie and I both love witches. It's one of our favorite subgenres of movies.
Yes.
And I think it's a great topic to cover because it's one of those things where you discover it very young. There's so many movies as a kid that you can watch as a kid with your family, and that has to do with witches. It's a really cool, interesting topic that spans various ages.
Right. And it's also kind of one of those weird things, and maybe this is a little too niche, but I think some people would relate. It's weird to grow up in a religious home that doesn't believe in it, but then they're like, here, sit down and watch this movie starring Angelica Houston for witches. And it's a terrifying movie that I watched all the time as a kid, and I honestly don't know why our mom ever let us watch it.
It's funny, yeah. It like we're told, oh, witches are evil, and yet we're given these movies where it's kind of easy to relate to witches and their plight. Like I don't watch movies like The Witches and Hocus Pocus as a kid, and countless other movies like Double Toil and Trouble from the Mary Kate and Ashley.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're getting into some deep shit here. This is we're gonna unlock some psychological shit for people that are like, what, Mary Kate and Ashley movies? Oh yeah, we're gonna cover it all.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you watch these movies and they almost make it cool to be a witch.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have, they're all across the board, obviously, with Hocus Pocus, which as of now, the second one is out, and we just watched that. But, with these, you've got these sisters that are obviously these villains, but then you have another movie from Disney, Halloween Town, where you get a lot of the soft side of what Halloween really is and what the witches really are. And, nothing's ever really weird and creepy. So you always have this duality of what honestly most witches are and then what Hollywood made witches to be.
Right, yeah. It was the concept of the good witch and the bad witch.
Right.
Even dating back to The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Glinda the good witch. And then, of course, we have the Wicked Witch of the East.
Yeah, and she was terrifying.
Yeah.
As a kid, she scared the hell out of me.
Sorry, I laugh because I think of the TikTok video of her sister was a witch, bro. And I'm sure a lot of you will enjoy that. But yeah, so witches date back long ago. Starting with, we'll cover it a little bit here, is the concept of witches really, I think when people think of witches, they think of the Salem witch trials.
Yeah.
From the late 1600s.
Mm-hmm. This is one horror topic that we get that's truly kind of comes from a real life, tragedy. Whereas a lot of our other genres kind of come from imagination and books. But
yeah, they're more fantastical.
That we actually had documented witch trials in the States and, of course, many other places. But Salem witch trials is, by default, I think the most popular one ever.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's a hot button issue, and has been, for hundreds of years now. But with the Salem witch trials, what you have is, there are these women in these small New England towns who, heaven forbid, they learn to read and write and learn to be functioning human beings, and that sort of thing was just frowned upon. So
yeah, many of them were just
intelligent women
doing normal things.
Normal by our standards.
Doing medicine was a big thing, working with herbs, just a little too smart about it. And, you were accused of being a witch. And, of course, this is something that unfortunately resulted in the death of a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, there were women who were accused of being witches just because, for like I said, they knew they knew things. They were intelligent, and that was frowned upon in a lot of these villages, and they were claimed to be witches because they challenged the authority of men in these communities. And throughout history, we've also had these depicted in media. I think one of the most popular ones is The Crucible, which tells the story of a young girl who accuses people in her town of being witches to explain away her and her friends' bad actions. So instead of getting in trouble with her father, she claims that this servant, this slave person that they have, she's a witch, Tituba. And then, of course, they start accusing other people in the town of being witches, and then we end up with the infamous witch trials. And people who were even associated with witches, like in the story of The Crucible, Giles Corey, he's literally, they put a stone on his chest, a giant boulder, and if he can support it, he's a witch, and he survives, and if not, he dies for supporting witches.
Exactly.
And it's fantastic. If you have a chance to find The Crucible, and any of those similar stories, like Arthur Miller does The Crucible, and it's just a fantastic play. And there's a movie, Daniel Day-Lewis, Winona Ryder. It's not horror, but I definitely recommend it. It is horror adjacent. But yeah, and then so The Crucible, great play by Arthur Miller, but in film it really started in the early 20s with this movie called Haxan, which was kind of a documentary, but not, it was like a mockumentary, one of the first mockumentaries, talking about witches and the history of witches.
Definitely something I've never seen.
Yeah, it's really weird because it was 1922. So as of the recording of this, it's 100 years old.
Gosh,
so
okay.
It's super old. It's up there with Nosferatu as one of those early horror movies. That's where it started, but we're going to kind of talk about some of our favorites.
Yeah.
And the one we decided to start with and talk about first, relating back to those Salem witch trials, is The Lords of Salem.
Heck yeah.
From 2012, 2013, directed infamously by Rob Zombie.
Yeah, if you guys haven't figured it out yet, obviously we fucking love Rob Zombie. And when we were talking about, I think in our Final Girl Scream Queen episode, we brought up Sherry Moon Zombie, and I talked about this.
Queen Sherry.
And how much I love Lords of Salem, and how, while the first time I watched it, I was very perplexed, but then the second time I was more intrigued, and the third time I was obsessed. And I feel like every time since then that I've watched it, there's always something new that I love about it. Obviously with the setting of the movie being in Salem, and there were scenes filmed in Salem, but I think the most of it wasn't. But you still get all these beautiful city shots, and it's very moody.
And it's autumn too.
Yeah, of course, because that's what you get from, Salem in fall is like peak. Everybody
fall in
wants
Salem
that,
is
right?
Like the ultimate white girl heaven.
Right. And then obviously we love it because you start as a late night radio show, and I think you can tell we're a little inspired by that kind of thing. Having these three awesome hosts do late night radio, playing heavy metal and
talking to death metal singers.
Death metal singers.
I love that
and,
when they're talking to him.
Getting mysterious records to listen to as well.
And the mysterious record kind of serves as almost like the MacGuffin of the movie, because she gets it from this mysterious anonymous person. It's from a band called The Lords.
The Lords.
And we don't know where it came from. We don't know where it goes. It's Cotton Eye Joe. And but Heidi, Sherry Moon Zombie's character, gets this mysterious record. She plays it on the air, and the women of the town are entranced, and they feel strange things. Like Heidi herself feels weird things.
Yeah, it's like they go into this weird trance, like they're receiving information that no one else knows, but they're like becoming or learning or something.
All the while we're getting these flashbacks to a famous witch from the Salem witch trials, and her group was called the Lords of Salem. They were referred to as the Lords of Salem, this witch coven that battled an old priest back in the day, in the early days of Salem during the witch trials. So that's kind of why I thought this would be a great movie to start with, because it ties back.
Because it's definitely one of those that you see the history. There's even, like a historian, librarian type character in the movie who, is super knowledgeable of all the things relating to the Salem witch trials. Kind of local historian kind of vibes. But it's one of those horror movies that you do get a lot of nods to, the Salem witch trials, and it's not just a witch created movie. And I think that's an interesting concept, that there are so many movies who have that traditional witch look about them, or even the style or the period piece, like The Witch, obviously being kind of these pilgrimage times. But then you have something that's evolved over time, and you've had glamorous witches and not so horror movies like Practical Magic and Halloween Town, but they still have this kind of that sweet pagan-y background. They make lotions by the ocean side. But, I love seeing how they've evolved, but, I still feel like Lords of Salem is pretty a new movie to me. I feel like it's not been out for as long as it has been.
It is definitely newer to the canon of witch lore, and absolutely.
But with that, they've always circled back around to Salem witch trials, even with the more recent and Fear Street. In part 3, where it's like 1600s, you go back to that time period, and you have this old girl who's being accused of being a witch, and as far past that it is, people now with horror movies still want to come back to it.
Yeah,
it draws them in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like what we were talking about with vampires and Dracula. It's like you always want to go back to Bram Stoker's Dracula. Everybody always goes back to that as your reference.
Yeah.
So it's like the Salem witch trials is kind of this reference point for people who are looking to create stories that involve witchcraft. It's like, it's almost like you have to go back to this is the checkpoint. Like if this is a video game, this is your like the checkpoint for making these movies always goes back to the Salem witch trials. Hocus Pocus is another one that I think we all grew up on, that I mentioned earlier, that we all kind of just absolutely adored, and it pays homage to the Salem witch trials because it takes place in Salem.
Sure.
So it's one of those pieces of fiction that I think we all can look at as, like, I think taught me at least a lot about the historical value of the Salem witch trials.
For sure. And it's something that, we all have a little bit of a morbid curiosity with, if you're like me and you're fascinated by, those of the past, just seeing the tours that people do in Salem of the old cemeteries and the witch house. It's a stunning place, and there's a lot of sadness to it, but there is something so beautiful and curious about it. I think that constantly pulls people back. Obviously, the reason why October in Salem looks like a Halloween movie to me, it's like I want to go to there, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
It's everyone's dressed up, and there's street performers and everything, and so you have the morbid side, you have this beautiful side that you get even like in Hocus Pocus. Like, I wanted to be in that town in 1993.
It felt like it was such an aesthetic that I think we all fell in love with because of that movie. Yeah, there's something about, like, when I think of, even just New England in general in the 90s, like with all the movies that we saw, it's like Hocus Pocus will always rank up there as one that showed us a side of those charming little towns that we all just wanted to be a part of. So yeah, it definitely deserves a huge mention and a lot of credit for kind of shaping us as horror movie fans.
Well, I feel like I think we were talking about it the other night. I feel like you grew up in one of three houses. You either grew up on Halloween Town, Hocus Pocus, or Witches. I was a Witches girl.
I was Hocus Pocus.
I have very vivid memories of my sister and I running around, playing make-believe, as you tend to do to try to keep yourself busy while at the store doing, shit you don't want to do as a kid. And me and my sister would look at old women's shoes to see what they looked like, to see if we could identify them as witches or not, based off of the premise of the movie.
Yeah, it's funny. The Witches was one I discovered later in life, but I love that the stories you have of it from being a kid you're some of the best.
Well, it's one of the most terrifying reveals in a movie.
It is. Oh my God.
The practical
yes.
effects, but when she, she's like, all right, ladies, take your wigs off. And they're all taking their wigs off. And they're bald and they're scratching. And then they take their noses off.
Their noses.
And she just peels her face off. And it's just this bald, hairy, super long nose, kind of ratty teeth and little mustache and chin hairs. And it's just an absolute beautiful prosthetic.
Yep.
And it was terrifying. It's still terrifying even now. And I don't know how that didn't give me nightmares as a kid, because she's scary as shit.
Yeah. Angelica Houston's character from The Witches, I think, gave so many kids nightmares. And like I said, it's one I discovered later in life, so thankfully I was old enough to not get nightmares from it by the first time I watched it. But I understand if you watch that regularly as a kid, which I'm sure a lot of you out there did, I'm sure that was one of those that's one of those ones that everybody describes to me as like it's a core horror memory. Like that was such a gateway into preparing us for being horror nerds for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I think that it definitely shapes the kind of October person you are as an adult. You're either like Disneyed out with Hocus Pocus stuff and, a wreath that says it's just a bunch of Hocus Pocus, or you're like the Practical Magic girls and Halloween Town girls, or you're like the Witches girls, where they're just weird, creepy. They have like the macabre things on their front door.
Yeah, you can tell what kind of millennial somebody is by what their horror movie is, because Witches, like you said, you're a few years older than me, you and your sister, you guys are a couple years older than me. So you guys had The Witches.
Yeah.
Then my generation, like a little bit, the middle millennials, we had Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
And then the younger millennials had Halloween Town.
Yeah.
And that's a great way. I think that's a great way to look at it, is like it breaks down. Not that we need more division amongst millennials. We're already getting roasted as hard by Gen Z. So.
I love all of you. So
yes, we love everybody, but we as millennials are taking a beating right now. So ease up, guys.
Right? No shit.
We wear neck pillows and we organize our pills by the day of the week. So. Ease up.
Maybe we're not quite there.
We're getting there. We're getting there. So yes, the Witches, definitely one that we all grew up. A lot of us grew up on. Hocus Pocus, and then of course Halloween Town. I think those are the trifecta.
Yeah.
That's the perfect triumvirate of horror movies for kids growing up. Halloween Town was one that I remember hearing about, but I did not really watch it myself again, and when I found later in life, because Hocus Pocus was my jam.
Yeah, and Halloween Town's just fun, and obviously it's nowhere near horror and it's super cheesy, but I feel like if you
but
are
the
a fan
effects
of horror,
in the movie though, I think you appreciate those, because I think we as horror
some
movie
of them,
fans will
appreciate
as a horror movie fan, even if you're like, oh, that's a kid's movie, if you appreciate the effects, if you're a Savini fan, if you appreciate the work of Rick Baker and Tom Woodruff Jr. and Stan Winston
and stuff that everyone in the town wears, no one's CGI except for a few little things, I think. But other than that, it's just these really cool creature designs. And I think everybody can love that kind of childlike whimsy that Halloween Town brings to the season.
I mean, I think I hear the Halloween Town song, the do 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 do. Yeah, I hear that and I immediately I smile. It's like you can't not smile thinking about Halloween Town. It's such a cute, cool Halloween movie, and it's one of those ones that definitely awakened a lot of people's passion for witches and witchcraft.
It also is for two things. I was about to say one thing, but then you said the appreciation of witchcraft. I love the part in the first movie when the grandma's opening up the purse and she's, pulling all this stuff out of her magic bag. And Marnie's like, oh, wow, a pentagram. Like, yeah, they actually explain it pretty right.
Yeah.
And to me, I feel like it's like the movie or like the memes where it's all like what my mom thinks that I do, what I actually do.
Yes.
And it's like Marnie is like the what I actually do of being a witch, because they just want to like help things and like make herbal tinctures and like dress like whimsy goth girls. And
Oh,
that's
Marnie
what it
was
is.
definitely whimsy
Right.
goth for
Oh
sure.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Come on, her robe and everything.
Yeah.
But also the fact that I feel like Halloween Town itself feels the way Halloween did whenever you were like in 4th grade getting ready for fall break.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that you and I have talked about it because there's a trend going around on TikTok right now as of the recording
Yeah.
of this where people are talking about like I want to go back to this, and it's the day of school right before winter break.
Yeah.
And there is nothing that compares to that.
Right.
It's like you talked about like Halloween in school in 4th
Yeah.
grade for those
It's
of us who
like,
grew up in the late 90s.
I'm walking down the hallway and there's paper pumpkins half hanging off the wall.
Yep.
And like weird stuff hanging from the ceiling and fake cobwebs
There's
on all
those
the doors.
weird rings where it's like just cuffed pieces of
Yes.
construction paper.
Yes.
Like, why was that a thing?
The loop chains.
The
that you
loop
cut.
chains.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Kids wearing their little crappy face paint and homemade costumes with a little bag of candy corn in your pocket.
Everybody, like,
It's a
for some
vibe.
reason, found a reason to wear their pajamas, their Halloween pajamas,
Yeah.
as their outfit to
As
school.
their outfit,
Like, I
yep.
remember so many kids back then. I'm like, wow, great Halloween outfit. It was their fucking pajamas.
Well, that's the thing is like you get the little print pajamas. It's like some of the Halloween costumes were just like those little onesies.
Yeah.
Or like a little T-shirt and a mask. And it's like the T-shirt had the character
Yeah.
on it that you were dressing up as. Like it didn't make sense,
Oh my
but
God.
I fucking loved
Yeah.
it.
So that is for those of you wondering, that's how we were as kids, and we
Yeah.
loved these movies like The Witches and Halloween Town and Hocus Pocus. They set us up
And
for
going into trick-or-treaters though, Halloween 3.
yes. So yes, Halloween 3. That is a natural transition into this one.
I'm sorry. I
No,
got
no.
real excited talking about being a kid for Halloween.
Yes.
All you wanted was that cool mask and those kids sitting at that TV.
You're 100% right. Yeah, we were those kids. It's like,
Yeah.
we would see, if there was something like the Silver Shamrock around when we were kids advertising those
man.
masks, we would have eaten them up. I
Yeah.
would have had my head shrunken in a heartbeat wearing one of those fucking masks.
Yes.
But Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, background, it is a Halloween movie, as in it is produced by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, but it is the
Yep.
first and the only Halloween movie to date that does not feature Michael Myers as the main antagonist.
Yep.
Instead, this movie sets up the Silver Shamrock Company, which is in public. It's like basically the Silver Shamrock was the precedent to what's the thing from Resident Evil?
What do you mean?
Umbrella Corporation.
Oh, yeah.
Silver Shamrock is like Umbrella Corporation because it's like on the surface they are the maker of fine masks and Halloween goods, when really they're a fucking evil druid cult that is killing kids by selling them these masks. And then when this fucking commercial plays, it's like the kids all gather around the TV and they get hypnotized.
Yep.
4 more days till Halloween, Halloween.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you hear that shit, it's because of Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. But it's
Yep.
this evil druid cult selling masks to kids, and the masks on Halloween, when they play this commercial all over worldwide television, the masks will then be activated by this curse, and it will kill all of the children wearing the mask.
Yes.
And our hero of the movie is Dr. Don Chalice, played by the miraculously handsome Tom Atkins. And he's going to stop this evil fucking cult from
Yes.
selling these masks and killing these fucking kids. And he's going to fuck your mom. And he's going to look good doing it because that's what
Yeah.
Tom Atkins does. If you've seen Tom Atkins, you know he just gives off that stepdad energy.
Yeah, somehow. I don't
And,
know. He gets the kind of young woman in the movie. And that's awkward.
It
but
is. It's awkward. It's really weird, like the love scene that they have in the movie.
Yeah.
But I love Halloween 3 because it is just like it's Tom Atkins at his most Tom Atkinsy.
Yes.
It's it's this weird, absurd 80s, almost sci-fi horror take. And it's part of the Halloween legacy now,
Yeah.
because it's the third in the series.
And people either love it or they hate it. We are on Team Love.
if you
I'm trying
couldn't
to
tell
remember.
from us talking
Right.
and gushing about it so far,
I'm trying to remember. I believe did you not see this one until you met me? Did I show you this movie?
So you didn't show it to me. I knew it existed. You did. It wasn't that you introduced me to it, but it was one that I always told you I never wanted to watch because it had such a bad reputation.
Yes.
People shit all over it because Michael's not in it, and I just heard so many bad things over the years. I was discouraged by all of the previous generations of fans that came before me. They would always say, "Don't watch Halloween 3. It's pure garbage." But then you and I got together. We were having a Halloween movie marathon, and I was about to skip from 2 to 4.
Yep.
And you were like, "No, we got to watch 3." So
That's right.
we popped in 3, and I was a converted fan at that point. Like
Hell
I
yeah.
absolutely adore everything about Halloween 3: Season of the Witch.
I'm glad. It's I love this movie. The soundtrack is a whole ass mood.
And John Carpenter did the soundtrack for it,
yes.
so he was still involved in that way.
You get Jamie Lee Curtis cameo with her voice being heard.
Yeah, she's the phone operator.
Yeah, the phone
she
operator.
gives the announcements over the loudspeaker in this city that Silver Shamrock basically runs. I'm telling you, it's fucking Raccoon City.
It is. It's very much. It's a bizarre movie, and I also love the fact that, it's a male leading this. It's not like a female witch, your typical kind of thing.
Right.
It's a lot of occulty background stuff, but you have the male at the front of this company for Silver Shamrock, this front that they have with the masks.
Yes. And I keep saying it's druid cult. That's not a joke. I'm not exaggerating.
No,
they literally
it's
in the movie they talk about that their lineage dates back to the original druids of Ireland, and that's why they chose Silver Shamrock as their moniker, as their gimmick.
Definitely
for taking over the world.
Yes, definitely takes it back to the old world where you see, a lot of your roots in paganism and witchcraft, where it's come from in these countries.
They even talk about Stonehenge, as well, and like how it's like, the druids were responsible for that too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
it's an awesome movie, and it's fun, and I think I love the song. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care that it bores through my brain, but I would be that little fucking kid with my mask on, sitting in front of my TV, singing the 3 more days till Halloween, Halloween, over and over and over. I would eat that commercial up. So hearing it from the movie
we all would.
Is amazing. I hope I'm not alone here.
No, and it's I think one thing I want to point out about Halloween 3 stars Tom Atkins, but directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, who would go on to direct the It miniseries. So he's got a great horror reputation, one of my favorite directors, and worked with John Carpenter on the original Halloween. Was part of the costuming department and the mask department, which I think is why it's so cool to see him do a movie where the main weapon used by the antagonist is masks. It's full circle, and I absolutely adore what they're able to do with Season of the Witch.
It's fantastic. I love it.
I want to talk about my favorite witch movie, and it personally, this is one I love, and it just spoke to me on so many levels, The Love Witch. And it is a different kind of witch. But at the same time, it's very traditional as well. Like, her methods are steeped in tradition. But The Love Witch from 2016, directed by Anna Biller, stars Samantha Robinson as Elaine, who is one of my favorite antagonists of all time in any film. But Elaine, as we meet her, she recently had her heart broken. And in that heartbreak, she discovered witchcraft. And her sole purpose is to make a man fall in love with her.
Yes.
And we follow her journey to find the right man that she wants to fall in love with her. But she finds a lot of the wrong men along the way. But she's already made him fall in love with her. So it's just... It sounds like a kind of a comical and a whimsical film, and it really is. It has a lot of whimsy for a horror movie, but it also packs some sex, packs some gore, packs some blood, violence.
But also, this movie is just so beautiful. Like, for something that came out in 2016, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. You could have put that in front of me, no credits, no dates, nothing. I would not have been able to tell you. It's filmed in a very vintage style, even with
Well,
the
she actually
lighting.
used 35 millimeter film.
Yes,
Like
for
Anna
sure.
Biller actually filmed in 35 millimeter, which is almost unheard of nowadays.
Yes, but even to the way the scenes are lit, the way they light her face in
Yes.
certain parts, all of those little things feel like
Set
old
design.
film. Yes,
Yep.
the set design. I think the movie starts with her in the convertible driving down the road, and just the lighting there and the music, and it's so fucking pretty.
And you can almost tell it's one of those old things where it's like you've got the big screen behind her as she's in the car, and it's kind of like moving artificially. It's so well done that you would like Natalie said, if you were to watch this movie sight unseen, didn't know anything about it, you would probably say this was filmed in the 60s or 70s. It just has that very old school feel. The wardrobe feels very 70s. It's very much like when you would watch the Brady Bunch.
Sorry, that I was thinking
yeah.
of that pink outfit she has on when she's like having tea at that little restaurant with the big hat.
Yes.
Is stunning. The wardrobe for her is beautiful.
Well,
but
the wardrobe for everybody, and the hair and makeup and everything. It's like you pointed out, everything makes it feel like it's from another decade. And it's Anna Biller deserves so much credit for creating something as beautiful as the Love Witch. But the story is just as absurd as everything else, because like I said, she's looking for love, and she's making all these men fall in love with her. Even this woman who befriends her early in the movie, she even seduces her husband and makes her husband fall in love with him. Like so when I say because like we said, we're talking about her and we're very affectionate towards Elaine. Like you do feel for her and empathize for her.
Yeah, but she's still killing dudes along the way.
She's still killing dudes, and she's just there's no rhyme or reason. There's not really like a moral code that she lives by. Is like there's no men that are off limits.
Right.
So that's why again she's very villainous.
And
in
even
what she
like
does.
killing them, she's like all sweet and loving about it.
Yes.
Like burying the guy. Everything she does is like in this sweet, loving, I'm sorry I had to put you down almost a vibe. It's like she's not really doing this out of an act of rage. It's more, well, he's not it.
Right, exactly. That's 100% what it is. Like, he's not Mr. Right, so he has to die.
And it's just that's what I mean by it's one of those where when you watch the movie, you see a lot of her craft is very true to the source of what a true witch does. And I love that, even to the point of what bodily fluids she adds into her stuff for these spells. But seeing that
it's very true to the witchcraft aspect of it.
I love it whenever I see a movie, and obviously one of the big ones being The Craft, where they worked with people on the set who practice witchcraft or were Wiccan to get an accurate representation in the movies. And I feel like The Love Witch does that.
The Love Witch does that 100%. And let's move into one you just mentioned. Let's talk about The Craft. You can't talk about witch movies and be a millennial like we are and not talk about The Craft.
Right.
It truly was something that infiltrated pop culture. It wasn't just a movie that weird kids could like or horror fans could like. It was the movie that everybody was like, oh yeah, witches are a thing.
Right. And it's also one too that I feel like even within the last couple years has had a big surge. Obviously The Craft Legacy came out.
Yep. Yeah, the sequel after all these years.
Yeah, so I think that got a lot of people into it who maybe who had never seen the original movie. But also, as we've mentioned before, is that era of style is really popular again too. So I think a lot of that, with millennials like myself who just love The Craft and want to see it, and I love seeing more and more and more out there for it and more love for it, but there's also so many people who've never seen it who are being introduced to it and creating a whole new generation of witch obsessed teens.
Right. It's interesting to see this new generation embracing something with so much fondness that we actually were introduced to when it was brand new. You know what I mean? Like I remember the trailers for The Craft coming to theaters. I remember, seeing it in the video store, passing by it, and it always being sold out because it was just the hot movie of the time. Like I said, it transcended witches, horror, all that. It was a big pop culture phenomenon. And, You know, you've got Robin Tunney's character in the movie who is kind of this. She's not a witch, you know, when she
Right.
originally moves to town and is introduced to the other girls. You know, she's kind of a goody two shoes, like she's a pretty kind of popular, preppy kind of girl.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's one of the, but she becomes a witch in the movie, which I think really resonated with those those kids who were not very embracing of like the goth culture, the witch culture, the horror culture.
Yeah.
And was like, no,
It
you
really
can
shows,
you can be
yeah.
a part of it too.
Because, and I think with the time, you know, we mentioned it earlier, but Hollywood paints a very large negative dark cloud over what witchcraft truly was.
Yeah.
And, you know, not to say that there aren't people who do different types of craft that have been used for dark intent and evil purposes. As many people know, and as the popularity of witchcraft rises, a lot of us know it's just about collecting pretty rocks and having herbs and stirring your coffee a certain direction in the morning. And it's not about, you know, we're not out killing cats and goats and sacrificing things to the Dark Lord, as Sabrina Spellman might kind of have us think a little bit. But, you know, you see this natural side, and it shows that it doesn't matter whether you're a Nancy or you're not. You know, she does bring that dark aspect to, you know, like you're mentioning, you don't have to be goth. You know, and you do have this diverse group of characters. You almost have this shy, sheltered, kind of almost nerdy academic character. You have the athlete, you have the new preppy girl, and you have the goth girl that everyone's scared of. And I love how they bring all of that together to create a coven for that movie.
Yes, the creation of the coven is very interesting to see the dynamic of the girls come together.
Yeah.
And now that you mention it, when you talk about Nancy, it's like she was kind of gatekeepy. Like that was like she
A
was
little
like
bit.
the original gatekeeper
Yeah.
of like witchcraft. Like
A
no,
little.
you're good enough to be part of it, but no, you can't go. Like
She was
you
a little
can't go-
gaslighty.
She was
you know?
gaslighty.
There's the scene that I love where there's this real beautiful moment between them, and they're talking about, you know, they're setting their intentions for what they want. And there's the scene where they're like, oh, look, all the butterflies, how pretty. And everything's nice and pretty. But it's also in that moment where Nancy's like, I want all of the power to myself. And finishes the rest of the wine or whatever they have in their little goblet.
Yeah.
And, you know, from there it goes to, you have this beautiful scene with butterflies to the scene in the house where there's all the snakes and roaches and rats and things. And I love that it brings the duality into the movie.
Right. Yeah. You have, it's like we were talking about earlier with Wizard of Oz's oversimplification of the good witch and the bad witch. It's, you know, the craft kind of reintroduced that in a 90s format.
But in a realistic standpoint,
exactly,
witchcraft is very much about your intention.
Yes, that's right. It was more about it wanted to stay true to witchcraft.
Yeah, and I think it does well. Like, obviously, I've still never been able to levitate off of my bedroom floor.
That is a fact.
But I still feel like you can get together with, you know, whether you're a coven or a solitary witch like myself, you can practice and do these things and have these experiences, and have a better life with your intent to better yourself. I feel like The Craft is one of those movies that I remember my mom didn't want me to watch because it was about witches, which again is weird because she let me watch witches, whenever I was younger. And maybe she just knew a little bit more and she was worried about it.
We're fine with witches, but not craft. Craft is where I draw the line.
So I don't know if maybe she was worried about that it looked like a teen, aspect kind of.
It was
movie.
also one of those sexy teen movies.
Right.
I'm sure that's another reason why moms didn't want people watching that movie.
Exactly, but it's
had
definitely
that Skeet Ulrich in it.
I mean, he's pretty, but he's a horrible character in that movie. And that kind of comes around too. Is, you know, besides it being, I think, a great lesson in almost an entry if you're interested in witchcraft, but also it's such a feminist movie. There's a lot of female empowerment, and there's a lot of uncomfortable scenes in that movie, surrounding Skeet's character with a love spell gone
very
wrong, which kind of goes back to, we were talking about Love Witch with love spells gone wrong. That's a perfect example of it in The Craft.
Oh yeah, 100%. One thing I want to talk about while we're on the subject of The Craft is The Craft gave way to something that I was a huge fan of. and that's the show Charmed.
Yeah.
Because if you remember that 90s, like once the craft blew up, I'm not kidding, it created a pop culture phenomenon. That's one thing I
Yeah,
was
think of
wanted to
all the witch
mention
shows
about.
we
Yep.
have. You know, I mentioned Sabrina, and I was kind of
Sabrina the
referring
Teenage Witch.
to Netflix's Chilling Adventures of Sabrina because we do have all these dark aspects, and you know, fucking Daddy Luke Cook as Lucifer Morningstar, but you also had the 90s television show Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and it was cutesy and whimsigoth and fun, and everybody loved it. And I never really watched Charmed growing up, but I remember watching
I
Sabrina
loved
all the
Charmed.
time.
Sabrina and Charmed, were two things that really spawned from the craft.
Yeah.
Once the craft blew up, it was like then witches were this hot thing, hot property, hot commodity that you could make a TV show or a movie about. And we got Sabrina the Teenage Witch, starring Melissa Joan Hart, and then we also got Charmed, which starred Shannon Doherty, Alyssa Milano, Holly Marie Combs as these three sisters who practice witchcraft, and just their journeys with the supernatural, their battles with the supernatural. It was very soap opera-y.
Right.
It was very, it was very schlocky, very campy, but it was a lot of fun. So that was one of those things that really got kicked off because of the craft. And once we were talking about the craft, I couldn't go without talking about Charmed.
Well, I mean, it started in the late 90s too, didn't it?
It did. It was like it was Aaron Spelling, if I remember right, and it's almost like he heard about this movie, The Charmed.
Yeah.
The Charmed. What the craft, The Charmed. What are we doing here? We're gonna do our show now. And he just it's like he saw the craft and decided to make his own show, which was a great idea, and it lasted forever. Got a reboot that did not do so well. But yeah, that impact of those 90s witches, they were everywhere.
Yeah, and they were something new, and I think, again, it's weird that we sit here in 2022 talking about it while I see people go absolutely feral on TikTok for whimsigoth decor at their local thrift stores, and I'm like, I used to have the celestial garden or bedroom set for my bedroom.
Yeah.
And now people are all about it. It's like my childhood is everywhere.
Yeah, you
which
see
is
these...
kind of weird, but also
right.
fun. But I mean, I grew up watching a lot of classic TV shows, so I started even older than that with Bewitched in the 60s. You know, which obviously is super iconic. She's got her own, there's a Bewitched statue in Salem, Massachusetts.
Yep.
And, you know, obviously it's not scary at all. A lot of those shows weren't, but it's cool to see how they've evolved from the Bewitched into, you know, shows like Charmed and Sabrina,
right,
into Chilling Tales of Sabrina, where it's a lot more dark and creepy witchcraft.
Right. It's great you point out that evolution of witch TV shows, because that's funny, because back in the day we could palette witches if they were housewives, if they were, you know, it's funny, it's like, it's very like, okay, it's like, wait, women have power. You can only have one power, supernatural or real power. We can't have both. And it was so sexist. Like people were ready to embrace. People were only ready to embrace a television show about a powerful witch, as long as she was still a housewife subservient to Durwood, as her mother called him. And it's funny because you do have this, like, it was like this budding feminism in Bewitched, where it was like, because her mother's always encouraging her, like, you don't need Durwood.
Yeah.
You're a powerful witch. You should be a powerful witch. And she's all like, but mother, no. And then the twinkle, twinkle, twinkle with the nose.
Little nose.
So it's like, you know, you have these great statements.
It was all cute, sweet, tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, but
they
had
still
so
were able
much
to slip
heart
those messages.
into it. Yeah. And, you know, I know you
even
haven't
with
watched
Uncle Arthur and like, being
yeah.
a little, you know, slipping in even a little of the homosexuality into, you know, subtly into this show.
Yeah.
It was just like Bewitched
Everything
was ahead
back
of its
then
time.
was very subtle.
Yeah.
They wanted
Bewitched
to,
was.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned it, because it really does deserve a mention now that we're talking about witches in the media.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, I know that we're a horror podcast, but I still feel like there's so many things, you know, we talk about, I feel like almost every episode, are things that we watched as kids that got us into it. And, you know, as just watching the second Hocus Pocus movie, and I feel like anyone could watch that without ever seeing the first one and be totally fine. Like, they wouldn't feel like they were really missing anything. And I just know that there's going to be a lot of people that Hocus Pocus 2 is going to be that gateway into something more as they're older. And that's kind of how we felt about the Munsters too, is it's a great, whether you like it or hate it,
It's going to
it's a
get a
great
lot of new
intro.
fans. Yeah.
You know, being PG, these kids can watch the Munsters and be like, well, I want to watch more of that Frankenstein looking dude. And then they end up watching Universal's Frankenstein.
Exactly. Yeah, it could lead them to that. Who knows? It could also lead them to watching House of a Thousand Corpses.
Right.
And, I always encourage
like,
that movie
what
for new
else did
generations.
Rob Zombie's guy make?
Who's this Rob Zombie guy? I'm really digging this.
Right.
What? House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, sign me up.
But, talking about Bewitched, and you mentioned kind of the feminism thing and, tolerating her being a witch if she's a housewife is something, I know you've only seen little bits and pieces as I'd watched it, but you've not watched it completely. But Chilling Tales of Sabrina,
Yes.
There's, from the get-go, there's a lot of pro-feminism, even with what the girls are doing, in their high school. These programs for these women in the school. And she's always so independent. And I hate to say like strong independent woman thing, because I don't want to say that at all. But that is, she embodies this divine feminine energy almost through the whole show, no matter what kind of power she may have gotten from her dad or anyone around her. And she's always just going further and further and further. And she's really just a fucking icon. And if you haven't watched it, you should. And I know you need to actually sit and watch it.
Yeah.
Because there's so much cool stuff, and I wish that they would bring it back and it hadn't been rushed to a close so quickly. But it is such a fun show no matter what age you are, because it follows a variety, high schoolers and adults. You're getting all these stories side by side. But seeing the witchcraft and the coven and going to the school to learn and how to be a witch is just such a fun experience as a show. And I love seeing stuff like this, and I want more of it.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I know that was, even though I haven't seen the show, I do know it was a mission of theirs before production. I remember reading that it was a mission that they wanted to make sure they get the witchcraft elements correct.
Yeah.
And, they work with people who actually practice. And I think that is one thing that out of the movies and the TV shows that we appreciate, it's the ones that get it right, and if they don't get it right, it's, because they're really silly, ridiculous, over the top stuff like,
right.
Hocus Pocus and those shitty ones from the 90s that we liked, like Charmed.
Right.
So,
Where
it was like...
It's more storybook witch,
exactly.
with a little bit of realism, but... I'm going to just say it's not practical to have a cauldron that big.
No, of course not. that's just irresponsible.
Talking about the trueness, I think something that I really love that we've seen that's a bit of a witch movie as well, just subtly, is Hereditary.
Yes,
and
Hereditary
I know he gave
does
us
deal with
Midsummer,
witchcraft.
which isn't directly a witch movie, but there are a lot of practices in that movie that witches do in the celebration of, the summer solstice. So I have to give a nod to Midsummer for that, even if they're not just straightforward witches. But Hereditary, you get a lot of behind the scenes weird craft stuff. And I think this is one of those things that I like, that it broadens the type of crafts out there. It's not just your straightforward Wicca or,
right.
What have you. There's a lot of kind of old world feel to these movies. But Hereditary is also just a delight in itself.
Yeah, Hereditary is a fucked up movie, just even without the witchcraft. But it's hinted very early in Hereditary that the grandmother who we're learning about, who had recently passed.
Yeah.
It's dropped early in the movie that she was into something that was not on the up and up, and then we kind of discover along the way that it was witchcraft, and that we learn, we start to meet her coven.
Yeah.
And if it's funny, if you're listening to us talk about Hereditary and you're like, I didn't get that at all from the movie, go back and watch it, because it is something that's very subtle all the way up until the end.
And correct me if I'm wrong, just from what I've gathered, and I know that it's such a, the world of spirituality and magic is so broad, but there's a lot of symbols and things that are done in the movie, specifically with the woman that the mom meets at like the grief counseling place. She does a lot of things that's very much a craft. And so that's why I mainly say it's like a witch movie, because you do have these things going on, these rituals behind the scenes that these people are doing to try to raise their demon king. So that's why I said it's
King Payman.
All hail King Payman. So, but it is, to me, it's. I guess if you want to just not split hairs and say it's more of an occult movie, but it is. There's a craft to it.
There's
it's
definitely,
just
yeah.
not in your face. It's in the background for the things that are going on within the family behind the scenes.
Right. I love the parallels between what's going on with the family versus what is actually going on behind the scenes that
Yes.
the coven has placed in motion. And like that's it. It's a coven. It's a witch movie. Like
Yeah.
you could say it's a cult, whatever. There's a coven,
Yeah.
which implies witchcraft is being done.
Yeah. There's
it's,
rituals. Yeah.
people could split hairs. That's a witch movie.
Yeah.
In my opinion. But yeah, so Hereditary. Another one I want to talk about that I think we have to talk about before all is said and done is from 2014, Robert Eggers,
The Witch.
Vavitch.
The Vavitch.
The Vavitch. If you see it, grammatically correct. It's two V's. It's not a W. But yes,
I
The
love
Witch.
this movie
It
so
is-
much.
it
I
is-
love it
yes.
so much. I could talk about it for days.
And we will talk about it for a long time. But The Witch is one of the most mind-blowing films to come along in the last decade as of the recording of this episode. It's 2022, and that came out 2014. So 8 years ago, we were given this movie, and it really is just absolutely. There's no way anybody could have foreseen this movie on the horizon. It is just so unique and bizarre and strange, and it's hard to wrap your head around. I know I've had to watch it multiple times to really kind of grip the depths of this film and its messages and what it's trying to say.
Well, and I'm not gonna lie, the first part of the movie with just how the dialogue is kind of threw me I felt like I had to get adjusted to it because
Right.
I'm not in this old world pilgrimage. It's such a different way of talking than what obviously we've developed into with probably not,
Bruh.
but
Lols.
but that for a second it kind of took me aback, but then I started to really get into it. So I feel like I benefited watching it a second time because I could almost focus a little bit more. This is definitely a movie. If you're neurodivergent at all, subtitles are a great fucking help. But you also, because there's so much also that's said in the background or so quietly that you almost don't pick it up sometimes. But this movie's beautiful and it's shocking and in all the right ways. I think we kind of talked about it on our slow burn episode because it does pace slow but with a great payoff.
It is
But it's jarring in the beginning.
It is. There's a lot that happens in the beginning. There's a lot that happens in the end. It's that middle that I think where it loses people. If there's anybody who's not a fan of the film, it's that it does take its time getting to that ending. But it is such a rewarding payoff. But we did talk about this, but it is basically, for those of you who didn't hear that episode or haven't seen the movie, it's about this family that is deemed too religious for a religious sect in New England and now must be outcast into the woods and live on their own and be self-sustaining. Too extreme for the religious extremists, basically.
Yeah, just you're not getting along religiously, so go away.
Right, and they do, and they go off into the middle of nowhere, and they're self-sustaining. They're living off of everything themselves, which is not an easy transition for them.
Exactly, and then you get a famous peekaboo scene, as everyone knows from the trailer.
The peekaboo scene's terrific.
Where the baby is taken into
a witch
into the woods by a witch.
And it's,
there 1 minute, gone the next.
And it shows the baby basically becomes a witch's oil.
Yeah.
And it's terrific. It's like, because you like,
it makes baby oil.
Right. It's amazing the way you get that imagery in the film.
And it's a jarring scene.
Yes.
And then it just is kind of quiet for there and after. And you have a lot of,
see the dissension of the family.
Yeah, and there's a lot of dynamic there, besides the fact that you've just taken a baby out of a family. You're also trying to get harvest and crops and food and sustenance for the coming winter.
Trying to hunt animals, as we see.
It's and hunting and just dealing with children. You've got the two little twins, Jonas and Mercy, And then you've got, this boy and Thomason, but so you have all this weird family dynamic, and the mother's spiraling and she's depressed and wants her baby back, and you get more and more and more of the witch appearing.
Yes.
Or witches, because there's plenty.
Yes. Yeah. As we see at the end, there are
But a
plenty
lot of them
witches.
are old and scary.
Right. The witches are old and scary, but the one scene, if you've watched the 101 Scariest Moments on Shudder, they talk about the scene where the boy meets the witch in the woods and she kisses him, and then we see the hand come up and grab the back of his head, and it's the hand of an old crone.
It's a beautiful woman that comes out, but the hand that grabs him is this creepy crone hand.
Yes.
And it's a really good play on, are they using babies to stay young? Because, the whole concept of, witches going off and eating children, and that's been a premise for decades in movies.
Yeah, we've seen it, and we
even
saw it in Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
The souls of children.
Yeah.
Is what keeps them young. Yeah. So in the Witch, we kind of see that explored too. So it's like it's funny to see the similarities and the commonalities between all of these movies, like what they keep about the witch folklore, what is very popular in the mythos,
right,
versus what they decide to change and alter and make their own.
But also that it's acceptable in Hocus Pocus for children to watch them suck the soul out of the little girl in the beginning of the movie. But then, the little baby grind up, and the witch is obviously it's pretty disgusting. But so Hocus Pocus does it in a family friendly way, but they do, like, that little girl's gone, like they killed her. Bye, Emily.
Yeah.
Your brother's a cat forever.
Right. Brother's a cat forever. We sucked the soul out of you. You're done. Bye-bye.
But so within, the witch, obviously the baby's gone, and then the boy gets possessed and his soul's taken. And then something happens to little children, they're gone. And it kind of climaxes.
You mean the children who the whole movie are singing, Black Phillip, Black Phillip?
I love those kids because...
You mean Jonas and Mercy?
Yes, because they're such good little actors. The part with the boy's possession where they're trying to, see what's wrong with them, and they're like yelling at them to pray, and they're like just flailing around on the floor going that, saying that Thomason's making them not be able to pray, and that she's a witch, and that she's stopping them from saying the Lord's name and things, is so unnerving, because they're these little children. Yeah. They're in between the age of obviously the baby and her younger brother. So there's, they're like 6-7-year-old little kids flailing around acting like they can't say anything because of the witch.
Oh,
but then they're also talking to Black Phillip, It's such a creepy movie. Everything about it is unnerving. I know it's slow, but it's beautiful. I love the way it's lit. I love the actors, just everything about it. And obviously, and I've said this before, to me, the greatest crime is that we don't get to see more of the human form of Black Phillip.
Oh my God, Black
all
Phillip.
You see is like a boot, his hand, and part of like the brim of his hat. But he's kind of like he looks like a dandy, basically. He's all high fashion.
I believe his outfit was described as very like the Cavalier Knights from back in the day.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people be like, why is Black Phillip dressed like a pirate? It's like, no, it's like that fashion was pretty and high end then. But I love that you see the scene where you can see Black Phillip's hooves, but then it shifts and then there's a shoe. So it's like he almost transforms in front of the camera, but all you get to see of it is his foot. And then his kind of a little bit of a profile when he's standing behind Thomason to help her write her name in the book. And you see him put his gloved hand on her shoulder, and you just have this breathy voice in the background.
Oh yeah, the voice alone is enough to make anyone want to become a witch.
Yeah,
and
like, let me go. I gotta go fly around a bonfire with a bunch of other old bitches.
Exactly,
like,
that
go.
brilliant ending of her just walking into the woods naked, and then she, they are lifted into the sky by their witchery magic.
Yeah,
it is. Whoops. It is, sorry, I had a malfunction there with my equipment, but we're all good. But yeah, so
it was witchcraft.
It was witchcraft. That was, so The Witch. We have a few more movies we're going to talk about before we wrap up here. And I know one we wanted to talk about was The Autopsy of Jane Doe.
Spoiler alert. if anyone hasn't seen it, sorry, it just got fucking ruined.
Well,
for
we're
ya.
almost an hour into this episode, so
So if you hung around this long, cool.
yeah, we're
But
gonna spoil the fuck out of this one.
Autopsy of Jane Doe, you quickly realize that she's not a normal human. There's all of these things that have happened to the inside of her body, these traumas, these cuts like all in her heart and like her lungs are burnt, and they can't figure out why. And it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And as they cut her open and do this autopsy to find out who this woman is that was found, crazy things start happening in their mortuary, which of course is the best setting for this movie. It's not like your typical, oh, it's the morgue at a hospital. It's like the family business. It's their house. They're in the basement of their house.
And they're in the middle of nowhere.
Middle
which
of nowhere
always
in a
adds a great
storm.
element to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's stormy. You've got worry about power outages, but it's actually these weird things that are going on during this autopsy.
Yeah. This one was also from 2016, directed by Andre Uverdahl, who he's got another movie we're going to talk about here in a second.
Yeah.
But the autopsy of Jane Doe centers on a father-son team of morticians who are brought a body from the police, and she was part of a vicious crime scene, but her body is strangely unmarked.
Yeah.
So the autopsy is there to see what ultimately killed her. And as Natalie said, as we get deeper into the autopsy of this woman, we find out more and more sinister things, as well as more inexplicable elements as to why her body would be in the shape that it's in and why she would be dead.
But the thing that's the most terrifying about this movie has nothing to do with the witch part itself, but part of the other happenings that are in the movie. There is a body that's there, and the dad does it old school. He always ties the little bell around their toe, and it has
So we'll never lose the bodies.
So we'll never lose the bodies. And there's a scene where they're not in the main room. They're like, he's like hiding in a closet or some of the
or in
little
one of the offices.
offices,
I think.
yeah. And you hear that fucking bell coming down the hallway.
Never has a bell been more terrifying than in that movie.
Oh my God. Every time it would jingle, it was like electricity going through my body. And it just keeps getting louder and louder until it's like right in front of the door. And it's such a scary movie. Everything that happens, whether it's, obviously the lights blowing out, it's scary. But like the idea of this corpse that they all knew had a bell on its toes walking around is just fucking terrifying. This movie, like, it kept me on the edge of my seat, literally.
Right, and there's great scenes with misdirection where something seems like it's something otherworldly, but it really isn't, and all the hijinks that leads to.
Exactly.
But ultimately, the reason we're including it on this witch episode is as they dissect this woman for the autopsy, they eventually, for some reason, I honestly forget exactly what led to it, but they decide to peel back her skin from like her tissue, from like her muscle tissue, and we see that between like layers of torso, skin,
it's almost like they're peeling around her rib cage open.
Yes, yeah. And as they peel back the skin, they find what would you call them? Almost like these glyphs.
Yeah, I mean, glyphs is I feel like it's a blanket term. It looks like there's kind of some rune type things going on there. I'd have to pull up an image and look at it.
But essentially, it's a witch's curse.
It's definitely these, these markings that are within a circle. So if you're a witch or you've seen a witch movie, it's kind of like a spell circle.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
And there's multiples all around her rib cage and her back.
Right.
And so she's basically just going through all of this over and over and over and over again.
Yes. And it's a beautiful story when you realize that she, when it all is said and done, that everything is, she's just back sewn up like nothing ever happened.
Yeah,
and she's
that's
being
the
taken
scary
to another
thing.
town. And and you realize this is just one more event in the chain of this devastation that this curse is being brought upon these people.
Yeah, honestly, it's a beautiful movie. It's terrifying. I love whenever everything's clicking together and there's scenes where she like seals back up basically.
Oh yeah.
So everything, she goes through, she just brings, generations of pain and devastation to these people because of everything that she went through.
It's a great great message, again, harkening back to kind of the what the witches went through in the Salem witch trials, and it's a fantastic allegory for that as well. But as I mentioned, Andre Uverdahl, the director of The Autopsy of Jane Doe, also directed another movie that has a lot to do with witches and witchcraft and witch lore. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And of course, the overarching story that bridges everything together is the story of the witch Sarah, Sarah Bellows, who wrote all of these stories that are now happening and transpiring to the kids who are the main characters of the film.
Yeah.
This is all set in motion by a witch, who was, of course, because of her witch background, is hidden away by her family, locked away, and she writes these stories, and now these stories haunt this town, and they come to life, and are taking pleasure in misguiding and misdirecting the kids of the town who are our central characters.
Yeah, and I think it's something I remember I was really excited for, even the thought of a Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie, because I grew up with those books.
And that's another thing I think got us all into horror as kids.
Yeah,
yep. We talk about all these gateways.
It's definitely, being these little short stories for kids, but the thing that really made them terrifying to me was the illustrations. Growing up, I was horrified by them, but I loved them. I couldn't stop staring at them. But with the movie, I think they did a really good job at giving a story to go in the background, because obviously their story isn't something necessarily from the books,
no,
but the stories that happen to them are. So, you have the guy who, he's like the jock or whatever, he's a victim to Harold, the Scarecrow.
Harold the Scarecrow, terrific story.
So I love that you take the story and you make the story happen to them. So basically all these stories that Sarah Bellows writes starts coming to life.
The pale
as you
woman,
said,
the red spot.
The pale woman scene was nauseating to watch in theaters. That's one of those movies. I saw someone a while ago say, that is a movie that they would love to be able to watch for the first time again.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree, because even though I think it's fine for a lot of young teens, even younger probably, to watch that movie, there's nothing inherently inappropriate, but it's got frightening visuals.
It is legitimately scary. That scene that you talk about with the pale woman alone.
Because I'm a grown-ass woman, and I was like gripping my seat with the way it keeps panning back and forth in the hallways, and it's just that red light is on, and you just see her at the end of every hallway, but it's getting closer and closer and closer to him until she gets to reach out and hug him and make that terrifying, comforting noise as she absorbs him.
Right.
Fucking nightmare fuel.
Let's break that down. That scene is terrifying for so many reasons. Like, you have the claustrophobia alone, of like the feeling of something closing in on you already, just terrifying. And then how she's designed, truly scary. How she's
so scary.
She alone is a terrifying thought. But then you have how many horror movies play on that of like, oh, you can't go anywhere. Well, eventually the character finds somewhere to go.
Right.
Chuck doesn't. Like,
exactly.
that's fucking like the whole time I'm like, he's gonna find a way to get out of this. He's gonna find a way to get out of this.
Yeah, because he's
and
running through all these hospital halls.
Does.
But that's the thing that's really cool is, you think about when you write a story, you're trying to write a scary story, you're going to make it so that character, no matter how many hallways and doorways, they can't get out. And that's what Sarah Bellows does with the story that happens to him.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool. There's a lot of misdirection with it. They call the archives room in the hospital the red room. So he's thinking he's going to go die in there because they think that story's going to happen to him. He's had this nightmare, there's a correlation there. And it's a good misdirection, because then all that happens is that there's the weird alarm thing and the red lights come on, so
which
everywhere
everything is
a red room.
Yeah, it is truly like like I said, it's a kids movie and it's marketed as a kids movie, but man, it packs some of the best scares out of a horror movie that I've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, and even seeing Sarah Bellows herself, she's quite terrifying.
Very scary design on Sarah Bellows herself.
And then you get the really cool cover of Lana Del Rey doing Season of the Witch.
Yeah, terrific way to cap off the movie.
Yeah. It's one of those fun movies that obviously that, none of the acting is necessarily like, oh my God, these kids are going to be the next greatest thing. but it's fun and enjoyable, and the mood of the movie is really cool, and there's a lot of really nice undertones, with the relationship. There's the war going on, the kid's trying to run away from getting
draft
drafted.
dodging, yeah.
So there's all this stuff, and he ends up joining and leaving at the end, and she's just kind of like, I'm gonna find my friends, and I'm waiting on a fucking sequel, and they need to give it to me.
Yeah,
now.
we're ready for a follow-up, guys. So whenever you want to give us that,
Yes, please.
we're here for it.
Yes.
I think I only have one more movie in my notes that I wanted to talk about, and that is it has witch in the title. But you really don't see anything throughout the whole movie, and that's the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah. See, I was thinking about that when we were talking about your great classic witches, and I know everyone's seen the image from the sequel of that quick frame of the Blair Witch at the end of the hallway when it's chasing the girl, but nothing to me is scarier than the first movie when you don't see anything at all.
Right. And that's it. Like, the Blair Witch Project is the perfect film that takes. It takes suspense and what we know about witches and the lore that they create around the Blair Witch in that area of Maryland.
Yeah.
And what the local folklore is. Like, that's what they do. They set it up so well by telling you about the witch so that throughout the whole film you are waiting for the witch to strike.
Right.
And it never does.
Never.
And you're like, but the whole movie, you're expecting you're going to see some big snaggletooth, awful, disgusting looking witch like what we're used to.
Right.
And that's not it, because ultimately this movie proves what we've talked about since our first episode is that the most terrifying thing is what we create in our own mind.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of filmmakers get that and they use it to their advantage. Whether it is just showing just enough of something to make your brain fill in the rest of those blanks, or to show you nothing at all to make you truly think of the worst thing imaginable.
Right.
And I think that's what this movie does. There's a lot of freaky moments where you're sitting there waiting for something to happen, building your own suspense up. And what happens might be scary, because what's not more terrifying than hearing children giggle in the fucking woods and in the middle of the night while you're in a tent, and you wake up to like bloody teeth outside, like wrapped in a little, satchel. But those things you see, and it's creepy and it's eerie, it's still the whole time you're terrified of what doesn't happen.
Right.
And, you get that ending scene, which is traumatizing. I was fucking terrified whenever I watched that movie, because you don't see anything. And it's almost like you feel like you in that movie without any kind of resolution.
You get no resolution.
And it makes you're like, wait, but what happened to them? Are they okay? What happened next?
The screaming. Her screaming is what I'll always remember.
It's just so good.
Heather Donahue.
She's one of those people who, is consistently praised as just absolutely committing to a role, because it's not pretty to have a camera in your face while you're snotting all over yourself, sobbing uncontrollably about what's happening. But she does it and sells it, and that's what makes it so believable, and you almost forget you're watching that movie.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine how hoarse her voice was after
God.
the screaming that she does at the end of that movie. Probably only second to Lee Wanell in his scream at the end of Saw. It's one of those movies that sticks with you for a long time, and
it does.
And it leaves a lasting impression, like a lot of these movies. So I've enjoyed talking about witches today, and it's October, it's spooky month, and we want to kind of let you know what we got coming up, what we're cooking up. We've talked about it for a while, but we're going to do an episode this month on Scream Kings and Final Boys.
So excited about this.
So we're going to talk about some of our favorite men of horror. We celebrated the ladies. Now we're going to talk about some of the guys who have made horror movies so special to us.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we also will be talking about we have a Halloween episode coming up at the end of the month. But before that, one thing we're super excited about, we need your help with, is we are talking about ghost stories, our own personal ghost stories, but we also want to hear your ghost stories.
Yes.
Anything paranormal that you have experienced firsthand or you've been told about that maybe has kind of flown under the radar, local legends, folklore that may be exclusive to your area. We'd love to hear about it. Yes. Send us your spookiest content, and we will feature it on an episode this month in October for Spooky Month, celebrating all things horrific. So that is what we've got coming up. We're excited about it. We hope you're excited about it. And we're going to leave you with this. Wouldst thou like the taste of
wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every weekend. Follow us on TikTok at HorrorZoidPod and send emails to horrorzoidpod@gmail.com with your thoughts, questions, and stories for us to read on a future episode. To all our Zoids out there, stay scary.